Welcome to the Innovator's Playbook podcast. I am your host, Seth Narayanan, founder and CEO of Telliant Systems. Each week, I'll be sitting down with entrepreneurs, product leaders, and technologists who are solving real world problems with bold ideas and smart execution. We will dig into what is working, what's not, and the lessons they have learned turning vision into reality. If you're leading digital transformation, scaling a startup, or just curious how innovation really happens behind the scenes, this is your playbook. Let's get started. Welcome, everybody, to the Innovators Playbook podcast. My name is Seth Narayanan. I'm your host. I'm the founder and CEO of Telliant Systems. I'm very excited to have Bryan Gathagan join me today for the podcast. Bryan is serving dual roles as CTO and CFO of Animalytix, a leading provider of market information and insights in the animal health industry. Bryan has more than 3 decades of experience in multiple industries, including higher education, banking, IT consulting, and deep experience in animal health industry. He has worked in large corporations such as MBNA, Innovator, which was part of AkzoNobel during his tenure, and is a founding member of Animalytix. Bryan started as a COBOL programmer and has held hands-on roles in every aspect of IT before eventually becoming an IT manager, all the way to being CTO and CFO now. So Bryan is very well versed in global business and management and has been a professor in a university, a board member, and a technology expert, to name a few hats he wears. I know Bryan as a customer, a partner, and a good friend in the technology and animal health industry, and I greatly look forward to our conversation today. So, welcome, Bryan, to the Innovators Playbook podcast.
Thank you, Seth. Thank you for the nice words.
Yeah, great. Yeah, so thank you again. And so, why don't we get started today? You've got a lot of experience in technology and business over several years. So, can you tell the audience where did your journey start and how did you get to your current roles as CTO and CFO in Animalytix?
Sure. I'd say it started back when I was probably 12 or 13 when I got a TI 99 4A, and my parents got me for
That goes
Christmas.
back.
Yeah. And that sort of started my journey to thinking I was going to be going to school for computer science. I got into UMBC,
Mhm.
which is where I got my undergrad, and I learned that computer science had a little bit more math than I was up to. Calculus and me didn't get along back then.
Yeah.
And so I found out a degree called Information Systems Management, which was just a
Mhm.
interdisciplinary sort of curriculum. It had economics in it. It gave me the opportunity to do HR, along with obviously programming and traditional systems type work as well. So that kind of got me to be a bit more rounded and got me into thinking about business things
Mhm.
early on. That led to me actually working for the university, first as a co-op and then full time. And I started out doing COBOL programming for the
Wow.
university and wrote a couple of systems actually for them while I was a student, basically. And that university job gave me the opportunity to do a lot of things. They encouraged experimenting in a
Mhm.
way because it was safe. It was academic playground. Even though I was working on the administrative computing side, my boss asked me to take risks and learn. And so I got to learn to be a system admin. I learned to be a PC manager. I learned pretty much every part of the IT stack, if you will,
Mhm.
while I was there, and which gave me a sense of where I wanted to actually spend my time, which eventually was more on the infrastructure and hardware side, if you will,
Yeah.
sort of the
Yeah.
back
Yeah.
end of things. But that eventually led to private sector experiences. And while I was at a company called Ryland, I learned that just having a tech background was not going to get me a seat around the table where I
Mhm.
would actually have an influence on the business.
Hmm.
So I basically learned that if I didn't know how to read a P&L, if I didn't know how to read a balance sheet, if I didn't have
Hmm.
idea strategies and these kind of things, I was going to be invited to solve certain specific problems that the business leaders decided I would get involved with, but I wouldn't have any say in
Right.
the business or these kind of things. So that's when I went back and got my master's in business. I did that at night, and it took me 4 years, 60
Yeah.
credits. Finally got it done. While I was at MBNA, I actually saw an ad for a job, an IT manager job at a company called Innovator,
Mm.
which was based in the Eastern Shore, Delaware, in Millsboro,
Mm.
which was an hour or so away from where I was living at the time. And I went down, interviewed, and I found out that my boss was actually an expatriate who was going to go back in a few years, and he was running IT and finance and a couple other things in the business, manufacturing planning. And we hit it off very well. And he said, if you take the job, you'll get my job when I leave. And so I had newly
Awesome.
minted a business degree, and I wanted to have that kind of influence in the company. So I took it. And from that point on, he left early. He left about 8 months into the gig,
Mhm.
and his wife wanted to get back home to the Netherlands. And then I was thrust into that job fairly quickly. From that point on, I've basically been in dual role, except for 3 years when I was doing a global IT role in Holland and also a global ERP program during that time. But when I got back, I managed the technology and finance for the U.S. business.
Mm.
And that's actually where I met Chris through an acquisition, Chris Ragland, who's the CEO of Animalytix. And when we didn't join after we were acquired by Shearing, we got back together a year and a half later and started work on Animalytix and been
Cool.
in that role for over 15 years now.
Wow.
So that's the journey.
Now that's very interesting. The point you mentioned about getting your master's in business is similar. After I got my undergrad in engineering, I got my MBA right after that. That was the trend back in India. Nowadays, they insist on experience, but back then, you can just apply and do an MBA, and which I did, which kind of really gave me the confidence to start businesses. And because I was schooled on looking at P&Ls and balance sheets and understanding,
Cash flow.
yeah, things like that. You're totally right in that. That opens up doors for people that want to get into business. Yeah.
And it's probably changing a little bit now. Even a CISO now has a seat at the table, and possibly even a seat with the board at times because of the importance of it. But back when I was growing up, so to speak, we were utility. That's all we were.
Yeah.
Except the banks. The banks, it was a big deal because
Right.
you didn't exist without that technology.
Yeah. And I think that the importance of financial knowledge and education, I think schools should do more, in my opinion, in teaching people. There should be a course on business or two, even in high school. I don't know if they do it. Maybe it's electives, but I think everybody needs to understand P&L and cash flow and stuff like that. But anyway, I digress. That'll be a topic for another day. Yeah. So moving into technology a little bit, you started out in technology, but you have a business background. Talk to me about what you are observing. Maybe let's keep AI outside now. But how rapidly technology is evolving. There's cloud, there's IoT, blockchain, and whatnot. So, how do you watch the evolution of technology, and how do you use that in a sort of a positive way in your organization? So, talk a little bit about that. That would be very interesting to hear.
Yeah, I try to stay up on, it's a weird way. I do it through not your traditional channels. I'm a big Wall Street Journal reader,
Mm.
and they have a good technology section.
Yeah.
And that is where I probably get my most, let's say, hey, this is something I want to look into and go through to other sources, whatever they may be, based on that particular technology. The one thing that I'm really fascinated about is quantum. Yeah,
Mm.
AI is one thing, but quantum is a fundamental change. And for me, it's still hard for me to bend my mind around what it is. It's a Stephen Hawking kind of thing. And to think through how it's working, as I've talked about business technology together, I've, of course, gotten away from the details as my career has moved
Mm.
on, but I was able to stick with and hang in with the conversations because I understood the fundamental. A bit was turned on or a bit was turned off.
Mm.
And having played all those different roles, that still is to this very day what's happening underneath what you're running, whether you're running in the cloud, whether you're running on
Yeah.
laptop or even on your phone. But quantum, the fact you could be a zero and a one simultaneously, and parts thereof, is just fascinating, and it's going to completely, if ever,
Mm.
commercialize, it's going to completely open up things that we can't even think of today, and be able to solve problems and such that was just as revolutionary as when the computer came around for the first time around. Uh,
Yeah.
that's my favorite, actually, technology, and I hope I'm around to see it commercially someday, because
Mm.
that would be awesome to see what it does.
Is quantum similar to non-electronic computing using chemicals? One example I can think of for human beings, we have a brain that's powered by basic chemistry at the end of the day,
Mm.
right? So when you create a computer and when they're trying to simulate a human's thought process, the whole thing happens in our head, which is maybe a foot by foot kind of sized object that has all the power it needs, whereas they have to use kilowatts and megawatts of power to create something using electronics to recreate a human brain. So, is that similar quantum, or is that a direction that it would go to eventually where we have other forms of computing than basic electronic flip-flops that are there in most devices today?
Yeah, it's so game changing. I'm not sure where it could go, and that's the exciting thing about it. And the fact that it is, as I understand it, I'm certainly not an expert on it.
Yeah.
The qubit is basically a wave of light, and
Mm,
so that allows it to be our number one limiter in
right.
terms of technology, which is the speed of light.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
is the thing we can't solve or can't get beyond, as far as I know yet. And maybe somebody's invented it and hasn't
Yeah.
told us yet.
That is really thought-provoking to think of possibilities because I think we are building a lot on the current stack, but I think if the stack itself changes, then that can revolutionize the way computing is done. So it'll be cool, really interesting.
So to give you a sense, for me, is how I look at it practically. If I had quantum today, it would dramatically improve what I'm able to do in our core business, which is produce market information reports, which we
Hmm.
do on a monthly basis, we do on a weekly basis. But some of those things take hours. The big production run takes 2.5 days. The
Mm.
way I understand where that technology would take us, I could probably almost constantly have these reports, or at least within an hour. And this is a massive set of data and massive set of rules applied to it and such. That would just completely change how people could even use our data. It may drive them crazy because
Yeah.
you have too much information all the time. It would be fascinating, would allow us to catch things mid-month and these kind of things
Mm.
that we simply, there's just not enough computing power for us to throw at it to do that.
Mm. Yeah, that's an area that requires probably further study. Definitely from me. I got to learn more about it, but sounds very exciting. Yeah, there's so much that's going on in so many different areas. We'll get into some of that in a little bit. But I'm gonna slightly go back to the key topic of my podcast, which is innovation. I'm very fascinated by how innovation happens and what are the drivers for it and so on. You are in the animal health industry and you've been for a number of years. So, can you talk a little bit about where innovation is happening in the animal health industry that you see around you immediately and maybe in the near future?
Yeah, I think that currently, in the past, and likely in the future, pharma, animal health, biotech, whatever,
Mm.
in my view, is driven through necessity as the mother of invention, right? And because there's a disease, there's an indication, there's something you're trying to solve for. You're trying to, and it's all products. So for us and for those industries, I would argue that it's R&D for the next innovative product
Yeah.
or perhaps solution to solve a particular oh, disease. And in our world, in animal health space, it has been a couple of new classes, if you will, so monoclonal antibody type drugs and also a set of drugs that are based on isoxaline. And they have really just grown our business almost an order of magnitude since I got involved.
Is that a new invention?
These are new products, yeah, for sure, or new applications of that technology. And the isox stuff came out of a non-animal health company. And then my former company figured out, and I think Shearing as well, figured out how to turn that into a antiparasitic,
Mm.
parasiticide, and flea ticks and such.
Mm.
What is now Merck Animal Health, their product in that space is a over $1 billion franchise globally,
Cool.
which is incredible in animal health. And then when I was there, our entire global business was basically $1 billion. So you now have a one simple product that or global franchise that actually is as big as the company was when I was there. I
Mm.
find that stuff amazing. And we were a top three animal health company at the time. So
Mm.
you can see in the near exponential growth that's happened there.
Mm. Wow. I know the FDA controls apply a little bit differently to the animal health industry compared to the human health, maybe a little less stringent. But does that provide, I think the answer is yes, but does that provide a place where some of the experiments are done or some technologies are tested out more easier in the animal space before they come into a health space? So is that a track for innovation happening? And do you see more of it happening?
Honestly, I can't speak to the human side because I haven't done that, but I can tell you it's still a challenge to get through both agencies, FDA, USDA. It's stringent for sure. And it can be a good 10 years from idea to getting the product into the market. And now there is this concept of a conditional license, which I don't know if that exists in human healthcare. Perhaps they were doing that for COVID-19 stuff. I don't know what
Maybe,
they did
yeah.
in that, but there are times we actually had a case where we were granted a conditional license years ago to address a problem in the market, or actually in swine, and yeah, so it was something novel.
Okay. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit generally about innovation and what do you think triggers innovation, and some of them seemingly minor at that point can become disproportionately very impactful. So we can think of a few like that have changed the life we live. And I look back 30, 40 years ago, the way I grew up in India and what is possible today is just unimaginable, the scale of change that has been brought about by various innovations. Maybe you can touch on what do you think triggers what makes people innovate things and what have impacts and how they transform the industry, the human situation. So kind of a general overarching question there. And maybe also touch on things that have really wowed you, like something that's happened that's wow, that's something that really changed maybe
Well, this,
personally your life or the world as a whole.
yeah, sure. Back in when I was at the university, I was a sysadmin at the time, and we were doing like a show and tell for the different things that we had discovered, so to speak. And it was a precursor to the internet. And I forget what the actual name of it was, but it was a bunch of universities connecting all
Oh
their
yeah,
computers together.
ARPANET.
Yeah, okay. Yeah,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I had to maintain a routing table and all
Oh,
this
did
good
you?
stuff
Wow.
to allow this to happen. And it was all voluntary. It was
Yeah, I remember
very
reading
academic.
about that. Yeah, yeah,
And being able to show people that you could search for an answer through this set of knowledge that was stored in these various systems was just amazing to me. And you could see the reaction of people once they discovered that, oh, wow, this is going to be something very powerful. And of course, eventually, a couple of years later, you get the introduction of what we now know as the internet.
yeah.
Um,
Wow.
and to me, that was a wow one. And that's one where was it really solving any particular problem? I don't know. I guess you could argue it was, but it
Yeah,
was definitely game changing. It changed the way we as people live and how the world works, and what allows certain businesses, many businesses, I would argue, to even exist now.
oh, yeah.
Without the internet, there would be no. It's the same with the cloud. I had this conversation with my team. The cloud allows you to bring startups and things at a much less cost
Mm.
than what it would have prior, where you'd had to buy all that stuff and boot it up. And it allows things to be invented that we didn't think about. Who would have thought about a global behemoth who sells more than a physical retailer that first started out as selling books? It's
Yeah,
amazing. What
yeah.
to me, these inventions that allow for other innovation is amazing. If you take even an app store, it allows people to just create apps. And if that platform didn't exist in the way that it exists, these other utilities, I don't know how they get out and are distributed in an efficient way. And these are things that, again, it wasn't really a need that was trying to chase. It just was a vision that somebody had that
Yeah,
really did come. So I do think that there are unique people who are able to have these thoughts and are well ahead of anybody else. Jobs, I think he said in his book, how can I ask the users for their requirements when they don't even know what it is I'm getting to ready to invent?
yeah.
Something to that degree.
Yeah,
And
asking what was it about the horse carriages? What would you want? They would want a better horse carriage, not a car.
exactly, exactly. Yeah, it's a good point. Exactly.
Yeah.
And
So that is true. It is really, like you say, it's awe-inspiring because the internet, on the one hand, computer is a great invention by itself, right? And then the internet takes the computer and makes possible for collaboration in a way that maybe even Gates didn't think of, or the early inventors of computers didn't think of. So the networked computer became a thing, and then the internet, and then the cloud, and it's like just cascading inventions one on top of each other multiplies the power of these inventions several fold by leveraging it in a way that was not originally foreseen. Oh, pretty amazing.
but then you think about the game changing in that sense too. I look at it from civilization in the sense of transferring knowledge. So it used to be a lot of things were no longer passed on when somebody passed on. Now you have an efficient way, assuming that it's actually factual, that is the content that you're looking at on the internet, That's the downside of it. But you can very quickly pass on information that was not as efficiently stored. It was in books, perhaps,
Mm.
but you could never go through a library and read the kind of knowledge and get to what you want to get to like you can through a search or now through AI, right?
Yeah,
And
we,
so,
I think you hit on the big next question or topic that I have, which is AI, right? So
okay.
we cannot talk about AI and talk about innovations. Yeah, let's see. What is the impact of AI? I'm sure you've had a lot of conversation, a lot of thoughts and discussions in your industry specifically. There's a lot that's going on, generally speaking, right? Chat GPT and things that you can do with that. But within your industry, what do you see? Where do you see AI having impacts?
I would say that, and I can't speak to knowing if any of the big manufacturers are working on this already, but I suspect that it's going to have a big impact on R&D and hopefully get to identify failures quicker, or to say it in a positive way, identify positive targets, positive things, and that you don't learn those in the later stages of trials, which is where
Hmm.
things get really expensive. And you would know that better than I. That's still, I don't know what the numbers are on human, and they're far more expensive to do those trials, but I would guess that the majority of them don't succeed in terms of an idea to market because all the complexities and the safety studies and all this kind of stuff. And so in the end, they just don't get approved. And if AI can help improve those results, that's going to be great for everybody.
Yeah.
It'll make the market or make things more efficient. And arguably, you could get better medicine
Mhm.
quicker and possibly less expensive because you don't have to regain all the massive R&D expenditures that go into getting there. And on the AI front, in terms of application that I see, is really on the practice level. So at the actual clinics and such, and you're starting to see some really, really cool stuff coming out that's AI based, and the practices struggle with workload. They're all overwhelmed,
Right.
and this should help in some ways with that issue that practices have. And I have a good friend who owns 3 practices, and he's trying out some of the technology and is really excited about it. So,
Taking
you know,
this notes, so automating notes and summarizing.
exactly.
Like that.
Yep,
Yeah.
exactly. And putting it into the medical record and such.
Yeah.
And there's other things, agents that people are working on as well. And so I suspect that'll be what we'll see first. Doesn't mean that the big or the manufacturers aren't working on something as well. I'm sure they are,
Yeah.
but I'm not privy to that at this point.
Yeah. When I was at one of the health conferences recently in March, got a lot of conversation about ambient conversation picking up, like when you're in a room, like in a hospital room or in a clinic, and different people are talking. You don't have to necessarily dictate to it. It can figure out who's saying what and extract the right data out of that and update the EHR was one of the things that I think Microsoft was talking about, and a lot of these. So that whole aspect of digital note taking and can really speed up because on the human side, and I'm sure it's on the veterinary side as well, is the amount of time doctors spend on record keeping.
Oh,
That,
yeah.
yeah,
And you think about it, to put the business part of this back in, of many practices, they're small businesses. They're they're wearing a lot of hats, and so anything that can help them be more efficient will really be positive for them. as well. And yeah, the
Yeah.
Gen AI stuff is, yeah, I think what's definitely driving the technology that we're seeing so far.
Yeah. Another on the AI topic still, my core business is software engineering, and you manage software engineers, and the role of software engineering is gonna change a lot as I see. You have a lot of these generative AI software for code generation, and increasingly more, they're doing more and more complex tasks, not just a pair programmer or a buddy agent programming, but you can give it whole problems to solve, and it can build and test and deploy and maybe eventually even fix bugs. So there's a lot that can happen and do so. How do you see that rolling out? And do you see a less need for software engineers in the future, or how do you see that evolving?
I'm not ready to go that far with that. We've used it a little bit for legacy code and understanding the logic in it, and that's been helpful at times. So where people who wrote the software are no longer with us, that
Yeah.
our team has used it to get some knowledge out of it and get to the issue quicker.
That's cool. Have you seen where it can create a kind of a design document out of existing code or something like that?
No, I haven't seen that.
That would be cool. I have to look into that.
I think what you'll see is that, like other productivity enhancers, it'll just let the engineers work on different problems. I don't know how you are, but I have a list of probably 300 or 400 items
Yeah,
that are
we all
still to be done. And
backlog.
we make progress, but we're a small company, so that's just part of the fact of resourcing. But everywhere I haven't been, there hasn't been a job where not only is my IT shop over its head and what it has to do, same with finance, same with other departments. And I think this would hopefully allow people to refocus. I think it brings them closer to the business. Sometimes an engineer can be disconnected from why they're doing it. What is the business impact? What is the
Mm,
reason these things exist? Why am I writing this code? What are you doing? Why you're trying? Oh, I'm trying to solve this problem for a subscriber, for a client. Oh, wow, okay. And these are smart people. We shouldn't make the assumption that they can't and don't want to even get involved and get closer to the why. So that's my hope, is
no,
that it
that's a
allows
great
that.
point. That is a great point. I had not heard it quite expressed that way, but that is so true in that programmers get so hung up on the latest version of Ubuntu or something like that, and you're deep inside tweaking some things here, like command line parameters and crap like that. Instead, you can be focused more on the business end of it and let the AI do the, yeah, do the sort of micro level, bit level, or byte level work that needs to be done. So that's a very,
Well, and be creative too, right? We're talking about innovation. Just say, okay, you're looking at that problem that way and get a different lens once they understand, okay, oh, that's what you're trying to solve. Can we try this as a method, as an example? But they're so busy now just writing the code that they're not necessarily getting involved.
yeah,
And I'm a strong believer, always have been, that I think everybody in an organization should have knowledge of why that company exists and how it makes money and what's important to it and such. And call me naive, call me altruistic, but I think it's achievable. I've been at a couple organizations. We have it here at
yeah,
Animalytix. You can do it. It takes work. You get such an enriching delivery back. You get so much back from doing that that I think it's a very powerful approach.
yeah,
And I call it buy-in.
Hmm. Yeah,
Everybody's bought in to what you're doing and really wants the success. And that's an awesome power to harness if you can do it.
yeah. No, that's a great point. Skipping ahead a little bit, let's talk a little bit about the culture and creating a culture of innovation inside your organization, right? So I know you run a team, even though it might be a small team. How do you enable people to be innovative and create things within your organization, the partners and others you work with?
Yeah, culture, I think you have to not be afraid to fail. You'll get one or two remarkable successes in whatever it is you're doing, but it's unlikely you're going to get 10. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't keep trying and try to do it in a way that you're not going to obviously put your company out of business through it. So you take calculated risks around these things. But yeah, and not punish the fact that, oh, I couldn't figure out how to do this. Or, okay, we're down. We thought we could solve the problem this way, and now we've got to adjust to solve it in a different way because it's still something better than what the client has today. And
Mhm.
it may not solve the exact thing that they wanted. You won't always be able to do it exactly the way you thought you would when you started. And
Yeah, that's so valid. In fact, I read somewhere one of the interview questions he asks is, tell me about the last two failures you've had. The point being that if you have not had failures, then you're not trying hard enough. Yeah.
exactly. Chris has a saying, I want to go out as far as I can, but I want somebody to be holding on to my belt hook so that, and so you're pushing. And we've really been that way. We've pushed hard.
Yeah.
Uh, and you got to take risks too. You know that as a business owner,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
nobody in business has
Hmm.
been successful, even highly successful without taking,
Yeah.
but risks are managed. They're calculated. And
Yeah. Other than the risk taking, what other advice do you have for innovators that you think would help them, or maybe even an organization through innovation? Break all the rules.
I think go for stuff that you also are making a difference, right?
Yeah.
So don't be innovating things that there's no perceived value or no value to. And, that can be sometimes, or if you can't convince people that what you're doing has value within your organization or within your industry, then that's going to be a problem because it may be a wonderful invention, but if it can't be used and can't be brought to the market, then it's a better way to say a waste of time.
Yeah.
Use those brain cycles for something else. And you do see it sometimes where people will take an existing or a brand new technology and they'll say, "Oh, I'm going to apply that to this particular problem," and then you scratch your head and go, "But what would be the purpose of doing that?"
Yeah.
And that was the early days of the internet. Now we're finally getting some of those things that everybody thought were going to happen in year one and year two or year five of the internet, and in year 25 they're finally coming around to fruition. It just sometimes takes time for people to accept that change, right?
Yeah.
And to
Yeah.
understand what's going on and adapt to it. Humans typically, I should
Mhm.
say, are not the best at, or at least
Yeah.
the modern day human being is not the best at adapting.
No, it is true. But if you have solved the right problem the right way, sometimes Google is a great example I can think of where they solved. It's not like search engines were not there before, but they created a product that was so easy to use and so user friendly that they spent $0 on advertising. It was unbelievable. So that's innovation, right?
Absolutely. And that's the other thing. If you're gonna chase something, almost be the expert in that space as well. Just really know your stuff because that's going to also be helpful as you go through, again, hit the roadblocks that you have, but also in the selling or the delivery of it that you have invented.
Yeah.
So there's a ton of inventions that never went anywhere. Again, think about all the stuff that Jobs and Apple got out of a particular company I won't name,
Yeah.
that all this were invented that are still core to the technology we use today.
Yeah.
And it's just the ability to say, okay, I know how to take that and make it work and commercialize it and get it to the masses. And you had some smart people in that particular organization that couldn't figure those things out. So you got to have the whole plan there together. It can't just be the thing, because it has to be then how are you going to get adoption of whatever it is that you're after.
Yeah.
And I strongly believe that, to your point, if it's really impactful, and it doesn't have to be life changing, if it's
Yeah.
impactful for a very specific thing, it'll sell itself.
Yeah.
You
Exactly.
know,
Yeah.
and that's a great place to be.
Absolutely. Bryan, thank you so much. I can talk to you all day, but thank you for joining us today for a great conversation. And for anyone that's interested in connecting with Bryan or learning more about Animalytix, we'll have the links available below. And thank you all for taking the time to listen or watch this podcast. And we will see you next time on the Innovators Playbook podcast.
Thanks, Seth.